The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. Rebecca sat on a metal folding chair that had seen better days, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Around her, dozens of other hopefuls waited their turn, each one prettier or more confident-looking than the last. She'd been here for 3 hours already, watching person after person disappear through those heavy double doors, only to emerge minutes later with disappointed faces and slumped shoulders. This was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be her chance. Rebecca had been chasing this dream for 3 years now. 3 long years of living in a cramped studio apartment with 2 roommates, working double shifts at a diner where the coffee was always too hot, and the customers were never satisfied. 3 years of auditions that led nowhere, of callbacks that never came, of casting directors who looked right through her like she was made of glass. Her parents back in Ohio had stopped asking about her acting career. Her college friends had moved on to real jobs, real relationships, real lives. And here she was, 26 years old, still waiting in hallways. But this audition was different. This was for Vincent Drake. Everyone in the industry knew that name. Drake was the kind of director who could turn nobodies into household names overnight. He'd launched the careers of at least a dozen major stars, and his films won awards the way other people collected grocery receipts. He was also famous for something else, being absolutely brutal in auditions. Rebecca had heard the stories. The way he'd made one actress cry by comparing her performance to a dying animal. The time he'd walked out in the middle of someone's monologue and told them to find a new career. The countless actors who'd left his auditions feeling like they'd been put through a meat grinder. Rebecca Chen? A tired-looking assistant stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, not even bothering to look up. Rebecca's heart jumped into her throat. She grabbed her worn leather portfolio, the one her grandmother had given her before she passed away, and stood up on legs that suddenly felt like they were made of jelly. This was it. 3 years of rejection had led to this moment. She followed the assistant down a long corridor that smelled like old carpet and someone's leftover lunch. Her footsteps echoed too loudly. Everything felt too loud, actually. Her breathing, her heartbeat, the rustle of her clothes. The assistant stopped at a door, pushed it open, and gestured for Rebecca to go inside. The room was smaller than she expected. And colder, much colder. 3 people sat behind a long table, their faces lit by the glow of laptop screens. 2 of them didn't even look up when she entered. The third, Vincent Drake himself, was slouched in his chair like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of expensive casual clothes that screamed, "I don't care about fashion," while clearly caring very much about fashion. His dark hair was perfectly messy, and his designer glasses sat low on his nose as he scrolled through his phone. Rebecca stood there, waiting to be acknowledged. 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 20. Finally, Drake glanced up, his eyes sweeping over her in about half a second before returning to his phone. "Another one," he said to the woman sitting next to him. His voice dripped with boredom. "How many more do we have today?" 14, the woman replied, not looking up from her laptop. Drake sighed heavily, like he'd just been told he had to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops. He tossed his phone onto the table with a clatter and finally looked at Rebecca properly. But there was nothing kind in that look. Nothing welcoming. It was the look someone gives a bug they're deciding whether or not to squash. "You're here for the part of Jessica?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer and didn't care. "Yes," Rebecca managed, hating how small her voice sounded. "I prepared the scene from—" Yeah, I know what scene you prepared. Everyone prepares the same scene." Drake leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms behind his head. "Let me guess. Small town girl? Waited tables to pay for acting classes? Moved to the big city with big dreams?" He smirked, and Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Am I close?" One of the other producers snorted. The third person still hadn't looked up from their laptop. Rebecca felt her face getting hot. Everything he'd said was true, of course. It was her story. But the way he said it made it sound cheap, predictable, like a joke everyone had already heard too many times. She thought about walking out. She thought about telling him exactly what she thought of directors who treated people like garbage just because they could. She thought about all those other disappointed faces she'd seen in the hallway. But then she thought about her grandmother, who'd believed in her when no one else did. About the diner shifts and the tiny apartment and the 3 years that would all be wasted if she walked out now. About how she'd feel tomorrow and the next day and the day after that knowing she'd quit. "I worked in a bookstore, actually," Rebecca said quietly. "Not a diner." Drake blinked, seemingly surprised she'd spoken at all. Then that smirk grew wider, meaner. "Oh, excuse me. A bookstore. How very different." He glanced at his watch, some luxury brand Rebecca couldn't even pronounce, and made a show of checking the time. "Look, sweetheart, I'm going to level with you. I've seen 30 girls today. 30. And every single one of them thinks they're special. Every single one thinks they're going to be the one I discover." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Do you know how many of those 30 girls I'm going to remember tomorrow?" Rebecca didn't answer. Her throat felt too tight. "0, Drake said flatly. "I'm going to remember exactly 0 of them. Because none of them have shown me anything I haven't seen 1,000 times before. Bad acting trying to look like good acting. Fake emotions trying to look like real emotions. People playing at being tortured artists when they've never actually suffered a day in their lives." The room felt even colder now. Rebecca could see her breath, or maybe she was imagining it. One of the other producers finally looked up, watching her with curious eyes. Like she was a lab rat in an experiment. Drake picked up the packet of papers in front of him, presumably her headshots and resume, and barely glanced at them before tossing them back down. Community theater in Ohio, a few student films, one commercial for a car dealership. He looked up at her and that smirk was back, bigger than ever. Wow, groundbreaking stuff. Rebecca's hands were shaking again. But this time it wasn't from nervousness. It was something else. Something that felt like anger mixed with hurt, mixed with 3 years of being told she wasn't good enough by people who didn't even know her name. Drake gestured lazily toward the empty space in front of his table. "But hey, prove me wrong." He leaned back in his chair again, arms crossed, that insufferable smirk plastered across his face like graffiti on a wall. His voice dripped with sarcasm and challenge, each word designed to make her feel small. "Go ahead," he said slowly, drawing out each syllable. "Impress me." The words hung in the cold air between them. The other 2 producers watched now, interested despite themselves. The assistant by the door shifted uncomfortably, and Rebecca stood there, portfolio clutched in her hands, her entire future balanced on whatever happened in the next few minutes. She had a choice to make. She could do what she'd planned, perform the scene they'd sent her, and probably join the other 30 forgettable faces from today. Or she could do something different. Something risky. Something that might end her career before it even started. Rebecca took a deep breath. Then another. She thought about her grandmother one more time. About the leather portfolio in her hands. About every door that had been slammed in her face. And then she made her choice. Rebecca closed her eyes for just a moment. In that darkness, she heard her grandmother's voice, the way it sounded on those Sunday afternoons when they'd sit on the porch together. The truth is, the only thing that ever really matters. Becca, everything else is just noise. When she opened her eyes again, Vincent Drake was still sitting there with that awful smirk, waiting for her to fail. The 2 producers were barely paying attention. The assistant by the door looked like she wanted to disappear into the wall. Rebecca set her portfolio down on the floor, slowly, deliberately. "I'm not going to do the scene you sent," she said. Drake's eyebrow went up. "Excuse me?" "The scene you sent. I'm not doing it." Rebecca's voice was steadier now. "I prepared it. I know every word, but I'm not going to perform it for you." One of the producers actually looked up from their laptop now. The woman next to Drake leaned forward slightly. Drake himself didn't move, but something shifted in his expression. The boredom was still there, but underneath it there was a flicker of something else. Curiosity, maybe, or annoyance. Rebecca couldn't tell which. "Oh, this should be good," Drake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me guess. You're going to tell me why you're too special for the audition process? Why the rules don't apply to you?" "No," Rebecca said simply. "I'm going to show you something real instead of something polished." Drake laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. "Real. Everyone thinks their acting is real. That's literally the point of acting. To make fake things look real." "That's where you're wrong," Rebecca said, and she was surprised by how calm she felt now, like she'd already made peace with whatever was about to happen. The best acting isn't about making fake things look real. It's about finding the real things inside yourself and letting them out. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask if it was okay. She just started. My grandmother died 2 years ago, Rebecca began, and her voice cracked on the word grandmother. Not because she was trying to make it crack, but because it just did. Because some wounds don't heal, they just learn to be quiet. She was the only person who ever really believed I could do this. Not in a chase your dreams kind of way. In a you have something inside you that needs to come out kind of way. Drake opened his mouth like he was going to interrupt, but Rebecca kept going. She gave me this portfolio the day before she died. She'd saved up for months to buy it. Good leather, she said. The kind that lasts. She told me I was going to need something strong to carry my dreams in, because dreams are heavier than people think. Rebecca's hands were trembling, but she didn't try to hide it. I carried that portfolio to 43 auditions. 43. Do you know what it feels like to be rejected 43 times? To have people look at you like you're wasting their time? To wonder if everyone was right except for one old woman who loved you too much to see the truth? The room had gone completely silent. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed quieter now. I worked 60-hour weeks to afford acting classes, Rebecca continued, and now she wasn't just talking to Drake. She was talking to everyone who'd ever made her feel small. Everyone who'd ever doubted her. Everyone who'd ever looked through her like she was invisible. I lived in an apartment so small I could touch both walls at the same time. I ate ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. I watched my college friends buy houses and get married and have babies while I was still chasing something that everyone said was impossible. She looked directly at Drake now, and she didn't look away. You want to know what's real? This is real. Standing here in front of someone who's already decided I'm not good enough before I've even opened my mouth. Carrying around the weight of every person who said I should give up and get a real job. Wondering if today is the day I finally admit that everyone was right and I was wrong. Rebecca's voice dropped lower, but somehow it filled the room even more. That's terror. That's real terror. Not the kind you put in a script. The kind that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning, wondering what you're doing with your life. One of the producers had completely abandoned their laptop now. The assistant by the door had tears in her eyes. Drake's smirk had vanished completely, replaced by something Rebecca couldn't quite read. He was sitting forward now, fully present, fully focused. But you know what else is real? Rebecca asked, and now her voice got stronger. The fact that I'm still here. The fact that after 43 rejections I showed up for number 44. The fact that I didn't walk out of this room when you tried to make me feel like garbage in the first 30 seconds. The fact that my grandmother believed in me, and maybe that's enough. Maybe one person believing in you is worth more than 1,000 people who don't. She paused, letting the silence settle around them like snow. You said you wanted to be impressed. You said you wanted to see something you haven't seen 1,000 times before. Well, here it is. I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. I'm not doing a performance. I'm just standing here, telling you the truth about what it costs to want something this badly, about what it feels like to be terrified and hopeful at the same time, about loving something so much it physically hurts and doing it anyway. Rebecca's voice dropped to almost a whisper. My grandmother told me something right before she died. She said, Becca, the people who make it aren't the ones with the most talent. They're the ones who refuse to quit even when quitting makes more sense. So here I am, not quitting. Even though walking out that door would be easier. Even though you've given me every reason to believe I'm wasting my time. She took a breath. Even though I'm probably about to get thrown out of here and blacklisted from every audition in this city. She stopped talking. Just stopped. The performance, if you could even call it that, was over. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched so long that Rebecca started to wonder if time had stopped completely. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the sweat on her palms, could taste the metallic flavor of fear in her mouth. Then Drake did something that shocked everyone in the room. He sat back in his chair, and his face had completely changed. The boredom was gone. The smugness was gone. The cruel amusement was gone. What was left was something raw and honest. Surprise. Maybe even respect. Where did that come from? He asked, and his voice was completely different now. Quiet, serious, human. Rebecca didn't know how to answer. It came from 3 years of failing, she finally said. It came from meaning it. Drake looked at the 2 producers beside him. They looked back. Some kind of silent conversation happened between them. The kind that people who've worked together for years can have without saying a word. The woman next to Drake nodded slightly. The other producer shrugged, then nodded too. Drake turned back to Rebecca, and when he spoke, there was none of the cruelty from before. "That thing you just did," he said slowly. "That's what I've been looking for all day, all week. All month, actually." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Do you know how many actors come in here and perform? Hundreds. Thousands. They hit every mark, say every line perfectly, make all the right faces. And you know what? I forget them before they've even left the room." He picked up her resume again, but this time he actually looked at it. "But what you just did, that wasn't performing. That was living. That was real." He looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Recognition, maybe. Or possibility. "I don't need the role of Jessica filled anymore." Rebecca's heart sank. This was it. The rejection. She'd gambled and lost. "I need to talk to you about something else entirely," Drake continued. "Something bigger." Rebecca's mind went blank. Something bigger? What did that even mean? She stood there frozen, trying to process the sudden shift in the room. 30 seconds ago, she'd been ready to be escorted out by security. Now Drake was looking at her like she was an actual person instead of just another hopeful face in a long line of hopeful faces. "Sit down," Drake said, gesturing to a chair that one of the producers pulled up. It wasn't a command this time. It was an invitation. Rebecca sat, her legs grateful for the support. She felt like she'd just run a marathon. Her whole body was shaking with adrenaline. Drake glanced at his two producers, then back at Rebecca. "The role of Jessica, that's a supporting part. 3 scenes, maybe 15 minutes of screen time total. It's a good role, don't get me wrong. It could launch someone's career." He paused, drumming his fingers on the table. "But I'm not interested in giving you that role." Rebecca's stomach dropped again. So this was still a rejection, just a longer, more confusing one. "I'm interested in giving you the lead," Drake said. The words hung in the air like they were written in skywriting. Rebecca heard them, but they didn't make sense. They were just sounds that her brain couldn't quite turn into meaning. "I'm sorry, what?" she finally managed. "The lead role. Catherine." Drake pulled out a different script from a stack of papers on the table and slid it across to her. "It's a completely different project. We've been casting for Catherine for 8 months. Seen probably 500 actresses. Nobody's been right. Too polished. Too perfect. Too obviously acting." He tapped the script. "This character needs someone who understands what it means to fight for something. Someone who knows what failure tastes like. Someone real." Rebecca stared at the script like it might bite her. "But I didn't even audition for—" "But you just did," Drake interrupted. "That thing you just performed? That wasn't an audition for Jessica. That was an audition for Catherine. You just didn't know it yet." The female producer spoke up for the first time. Her voice was warm, nothing like Drake's had been earlier. "Catherine is a woman who's lost everything and is trying to rebuild her life from scratch. She's raw, vulnerable, angry, hopeful, sometimes all at once. What you just showed us, that's Catherine." Rebecca picked up the script with trembling hands. The title page read Unbreakable in simple black letters. She flipped through it, easily 120 pages. This wasn't a supporting role. This was the whole movie. "I don't understand," Rebecca said quietly. "Why would you give a lead role to someone with my resume? Someone with no major credits, no real experience?" Drake leaned back in his chair, but his posture was completely different now. Open instead of closed off. "You want the honest answer? Because I'm tired of working with actors who've forgotten how to be human beings. They're so busy being movie stars that they've lost touch with what made them interesting in the first place." He gestured at the script in her hands. "This film needs someone who still has that hunger, that fear, that desperation. You can't fake those things. You either have them or you don't." "There's a catch, though," the other producer added. He had a kind face, round glasses, the look of someone who'd rather be reading a book than sitting in auditions. "There's always a catch." Rebecca's brief moment of hope began to deflate. "Of course there was a catch. There was always a catch," Drake nodded. "The role requires 6 months of intensive preparation before we even start filming. We're talking full-time commitment. Combat training. Catherine gets into several physical fights in the film. Dialect coaching. She's supposed to be from Boston and your Ohio accent is still there. Physical transformation. You'll need to lose about 15 pounds and gain muscle mass. And acting coaching with some of the best in the business." 6 months, Rebecca repeated slowly. 6 months where this is your only job, your only focus, your entire life. Drake folded his hands on the table. Which means you'd need to quit whatever job you're working now. Move to Los Angeles, we'd cover housing. Give up everything else. And here's the real catch. Even after all that, there's no guarantee the film actually gets made. Rebecca felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. What do you mean, no guarantee? The female producer explained. We have most of our funding, but not all of it. 2 investors pulled out last month. We're close to securing replacements, very close, but until the contracts are signed, nothing is certain. If the funding falls through, the project dies. And you'd have spent 6 months preparing for a role in a movie that never happens. But you'd be paid for those 6 months, Drake added quickly. Not movie star money, but enough to live on. Enough that you wouldn't be living on ramen noodles. Rebecca's mind was racing. This was everything she'd ever wanted, wrapped up in everything she'd ever feared. A lead role, real training, a chance to work with Vincent Drake, whose name could open doors she didn't even know existed. But she'd have to give up her safety net, the bookstore job that paid her rent, the tiny apartment she shared with roommates, the life she'd built brick by brick in Ohio, and then rebuilt in the city. Can I think about it? She asked. You have 24 hours, Drake said. Tomorrow at this time I need your answer. Yes or no. If it's no, no hard feelings, we'll keep looking for our Catherine. If it's yes, we start training Monday. Monday, Rebecca's voice squeaked. That's less than a week away. Welcome to the film industry, Drake said. And for the first time there was a hint of a real smile on his face. Not a smirk. An actual smile. Nothing ever happens when you think it's going to happen, and then everything happens all at once. The female producer stood up and handed Rebecca a business card. My name is Patricia, by the way. Call me when you've made your decision. Anytime, day or night. This is my personal cell. Rebecca took the card, still feeling like she was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. She couldn't tell which. One more thing, Drake said as she stood to leave. Why did you do that? Why did you go off script? You had to know it was a risk. That I could have thrown you out. Rebecca thought about it for a moment, really thought about it. Because I was already losing, she finally said. You'd already decided I wasn't good enough before I walked in. I could see it on your face. So I figured I had nothing to lose by trying something different. By being honest instead of trying to impress you. Drake nodded slowly. That's good instinct. That's exactly the kind of instinct Catherine needs. He stood up and extended his hand. Whatever you decide, Rebecca, thank you. You reminded me why I love this job. That doesn't happen very often anymore. Rebecca shook his hand, surprised by how normal it felt. How human. This was the same person who'd been cruel to her 20 minutes ago, and now he was thanking her. The film industry was weird. She walked out of that room in a daze, past the long hallway, past the waiting area where other actors still sat hoping for their chance. The tired assistant who'd called her name caught up with her at the elevator. That was amazing, the assistant whispered. I've been working here for 2 years, and I've never seen him look at someone like that. Never seen him actually care. Rebecca managed a weak smile. Thanks. Take the role, the assistant said urgently as the elevator doors opened. I know it's scary, but take it. Chances like this don't come around twice. The elevator doors closed, and Rebecca was alone with her reflection in the polished metal. She looked the same as she had 3 hours ago, but everything was different now. Everything had changed. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment. She needed to call someone. Tell someone, but who? Her parents would freak out. Her roommates wouldn't understand. Her college friends had stopped believing in her dreams years ago. She scrolled to a contact she hadn't called in months. Her old acting teacher. The one who'd taught her community theater class back in Ohio. The one who'd told her she had something special, back before the world had tried to convince her otherwise. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Rebecca, is that you? I haven't heard from you in ages. Ms. Peterson, Rebecca said, and suddenly she was crying. Not sad crying, not happy crying. Just overwhelmed crying. Something just happened and I don't know what to do. Tell me everything, Ms. Peterson said gently. So Rebecca did. She stood in the parking lot of Sterling Productions and told her old teacher about the audition. About Drake's cruelty. About her grandmother's portfolio. About the lead role and the 6 months and the risk and the fear and all of it. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. What does your gut tell you? Miss Peterson finally asked. Rebecca closed her eyes and listened to that small voice inside her, the one that had kept her going through 43 rejections and 3 years of doubt. My gut tells me I'd regret it forever if I said no, Rebecca whispered. Then you already know your answer, Miss Peterson said softly. The only question is whether you're brave enough to say it out loud. Rebecca called Patricia at 6 in the morning. She hadn't slept at all. She'd spent the entire night pacing her tiny apartment, reading the script cover to cover 3 times, making lists of pros and cons that all felt meaningless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw 2 versions of her future. One where she said yes and it changed everything, and one where she said no and spent the rest of her life wondering what might have been. I'll do it, she said when Patricia answered, her voice groggy with sleep. I'm in. There was a pause, then Patricia's voice came back clearer, more awake. You're sure? You've thought about everything we discussed? I'm terrified, Rebecca admitted. But I'm sure. Good, Patricia said, and Rebecca could hear the smile in her voice. Fear means you understand what's at stake. We'll see you Monday at 6 a.m. Wear comfortable clothes you can move in. And Rebecca, welcome to the team. That was Friday. By Sunday night, Rebecca had quit her job at the bookstore, sublet her room to a friend, packed everything she owned into 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes, and gotten on a plane to Los Angeles. She'd said goodbye to the life she'd built, to the safety net she'd clung to for 3 years, to the version of herself who played it. Safe Monday morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. The training facility was in a warehouse in an industrial part of LA that Rebecca would never have found on her own. Inside, it looked like a cross between a gym, a dance studio, and a dojo. Mirrors covered one wall. Mats covered the floor. Equipment Rebecca couldn't even name lined the other walls. Drake was already there, along with Patricia and 3 other people Rebecca didn't recognize. He looked different in workout clothes, more human somehow, less like an untouchable director and more like an actual person. You came, he said when he saw her. Did you think I wouldn't? Rebecca asked. Honestly? I gave it 50-50 odds, Drake gestured to the others. This is Chen. He's going to handle your combat training. Former stunt coordinator, works with all the major action stars. This is Rita, dialect coach. She's going to fix that Midwest accent. And this is Theodore. He'll be your acting coach for the next 6 months. Theodore was older, probably in his 70s, with wild white hair and kind eyes. He shook Rebecca's hand with surprising strength. I've been coaching actors for 45 years, he said. Vincent showed me the video of your audition. That was the most honest piece of work I've seen in a decade. My job isn't to change that. It's to help you harness it. Chen, the combat trainer, was all business. We're going to start slow. Build your foundation. You ever done any martial arts? Boxing? Any combat sports? Does kickboxing on a YouTube video in my living room count? Rebecca asked. Chen almost smiled. We'll start very slow. The first week nearly killed her. Rebecca woke up at 5 a.m., trained with Chen from 6 to 9, worked with Rita on her accent from 9 to 11, had a quick lunch, then spent the afternoon with Theodore working through scenes from the script. By the time she collapsed into bed each night in the small apartment the production had rented for her, every muscle in her body was screaming. But something strange started happening around week 3. Her body stopped fighting the training and started adapting to it. The punches Chen taught her began to feel natural instead of awkward. The Boston accent Rita drilled into her head started to come out without her having to think about it. And the work with Theodore, that was changing something deeper inside her. You're holding back, Theodore told her one afternoon during their 4th week. They'd been working on a scene where Catherine confronts the man who destroyed her life. You're doing everything technically right, but you're not letting yourself really feel it. I am feeling it, Rebecca protested. No, you're indicating feeling. You're showing me what anger looks like. I want you to actually be angry. Theodore leaned forward in his chair. What makes you angry, Rebecca? Really, truly angry? Rebecca thought about it. I don't know. I don't really get angry much. Everyone gets angry. You're just afraid of it. Theodore's voice was gentle but firm. Catherine can't afford to be afraid of her own emotions. Neither can you. So let me ask again, what makes you angry? And suddenly Rebecca knew. Being dismissed, she said quietly. Being looked at like I don't matter. Like my dreams are cute little hobbies instead of my whole life. Like I'm wasting people's time just by existing in their space. Good, that's real. Now use it. They ran the scene again, and this time Rebecca didn't hold back. She let herself remember every casting director who'd barely looked at her, every person who'd asked when she was going to get a real job, every time someone had made her feel small. The anger poured out of her like water from a broken dam, and when the scene ended she was shaking and crying, and Theodore was nodding with satisfaction. "That," he said, "that's what we need." Drake started showing up to watch her training sessions around week 6. He never said much, just observed from the corner of the room, taking notes. It made Rebecca nervous at first, performing with him watching, but eventually she learned to ignore his presence. Or at least pretend to. One day after a particularly brutal training session with Chen, she'd been learning how to take falls without actually getting hurt. Drake pulled her aside. "You've lost 12 pounds, he said. It wasn't a compliment or a criticism, just an observation. 13, actually, Rebecca replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. Chen's training is no joke. How do you feel? Rebecca had to think about it. Stronger. Not just physically. Everything feels different. Like I'm becoming someone new. Drake nodded slowly. That's good. That's what needs to happen. Catherine isn't you, but she has to come from somewhere real inside you. You're building the foundation for her to exist. Can I ask you something? Rebecca said before she could stop herself. Sure. Why were you so cruel in that first audition? Was it all a test? Drake was quiet for a long moment. Honestly? No, I wasn't testing you. I was just being a jerk. He looked uncomfortable admitting it. I'd seen so many people that day. So many people who didn't care, who were just going through the motions. I'd gotten cynical. Bitter. I stopped seeing people as people and started seeing them as just another face in a long line of faces. He met her eyes. What you did, going off script, being honest, it woke me up. Reminded me that there are still people out there who actually care about this work. Who mean it. So you weren't secretly hoping someone would do what I did? God, no. I was fully prepared to hate everyone I saw that day and go home miserable. Drake actually laughed. You surprised me. That doesn't happen often. Week 10 brought a new challenge. Patricia called Rebecca into Drake's office. An actual office now. Not just an audition room. And she knew from Patricia's face that something was wrong. The funding fell through, Patricia said without preamble. Our 2 main investors backed out this morning. They're putting their money into something they think is safer. Rebecca felt the floor drop out from under her. So that's it? It's over? Not over, Drake corrected. He was pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. Just complicated. We need to find new investors, which means we need to show them why this film is worth their money. Why you're worth their money? How do we do that? Rebecca asked. We put together a proof of concept, Patricia explained. Film a few key scenes, show them what the movie could be. Let them see you in action. You've been training for 10 weeks, Drake said. We're going to find out if it's been working. We're going to film the confrontation scene, the one you've been working on with Theodore. If it's good, if you're good, we show it to potential investors and pray they see what I see. And if they don't? Rebecca asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Drake stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Then we all move on. You'll have gotten 10 weeks of world-class training. I'll have lost a lot of time and money. Patricia will have to explain to the studio why we bet on an unknown and lost. He paused. But I don't think that's going to happen. Why not? Because I've been doing this for 20 years and I know when someone has it. You have it, Rebecca. The question is whether you believe that yet. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the shoot. It would be just one scene, 5 minutes of film. But those 5 minutes had to be perfect. Had to show everything Rebecca had learned. Everything she'd become over the past 3 months. The night before the shoot, Rebecca couldn't sleep. Again. She kept running the scene in her head, over and over until the words lost all meaning and became just sounds. She thought about her grandmother, about the portfolio that still sat in her closet, about the 43 rejections that had led to one yes that had led to this moment. At 3 a.m, she got a text from an unknown number. Stop overthinking. Trust your training. Trust yourself. See you in a few hours. VD Vincent Drake had somehow known she'd be awake, worrying. Had somehow known she needed to hear exactly those words. Rebecca set down her phone and closed her eyes. Tomorrow everything would change. One way or another, her future would be decided by 5 minutes of film. She just had to trust that the person she'd become over the past 10 weeks was enough. The set was smaller than Rebecca expected. Just a simple room dressed to look like a rundown apartment, with crew members adjusting lights and checking camera angles, but the energy in the space was electric. Everyone knew what was riding on this. Everyone understood that 5 minutes of film could either save the project or kill it completely. Drake was in full director mode now, focused and intense in a way Rebecca hadn't seen during training. He walked her through the blocking one more time, showing her exactly where she needed to stand, where the cameras would be, how the light would hit her face. "Remember," he said quietly, "the investors watching this don't know you. They don't know your story. They don't know about the 10 weeks of training or the 43 rejections or any of it. All they're going to see is what's on that screen. So show them everything. Show them Catherine, yes, but also show them Rebecca. Show them why you're the only person who can play this role." Rebecca nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Theodore appeared beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've done this scene 50 times in rehearsal. You know it backwards and forwards. Stop trying to be perfect and just be present. That's all Catherine needs. That's all any good performance needs." The scene they were filming was the heart of the movie. Catherine confronting the person who destroyed her life, demanding answers, demanding justice, demanding to be seen as a human being instead of just collateral damage. It was raw and painful and angry and hopeful all at once. It was in many ways the audition scene Rebecca had performed 12 weeks ago, but deeper, more focused, more lived in. "Positions," Drake called out, and the set went quiet. Rebecca took her place. Across from her stood another actor, a veteran who'd flown in just for this shoot. He was playing the antagonist, and he was good. Really good. The kind of good that made you step up your own game or get left behind. "Sound ready? Camera ready?" Drake's voice was calm, professional. "Action." For a split second, Rebecca froze. Her mind went blank. All the training, all the rehearsal, all the preparation vanished like smoke. She could feel everyone watching her, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Then she looked at the other actor, and something clicked. She wasn't Rebecca anymore. She was Catherine. And Catherine had been waiting 12 years for this moment. 12 years of pain and anger and survival had led to this conversation, and she wasn't about to waste it. The words came out different than they had in rehearsal. More jagged, more real. Rebecca could hear the Boston accent Rita had drilled into her, but it didn't sound coached anymore. It sounded natural, like she'd been speaking that way her whole life. When Catherine's voice cracked with emotion, it wasn't planned. It just happened. When her hands shook, it wasn't for the camera. It was because that's what Catherine's hands would do in this moment. The other actor responded, giving her something real to work with. And suddenly they weren't two actors anymore. They were two people having the most important conversation of their lives. Rebecca forgot about the cameras, forgot about Drake and the crew and the investors who would eventually watch this. There was only this moment, this scene, this character who had somehow become part of her. When Catherine finally broke down, not in defeat but in exhausted relief at finally being heard, Rebecca felt it in her chest like something physical. Tears ran down her face, but they weren't acting tears. They were real. Everything was real. "Cut," Drake said quietly, and the spell broke. The set remained silent for a long moment. Rebecca stood there breathing hard, still half in character and half herself. She looked at Drake, trying to read his expression, but his face was unreadable. Then the other actor started clapping. Just him at first, then the crew joined in. Theodore was beaming. Patricia had tears in her eyes. And Drake was nodding slowly, a real smile spreading across his face. "That's it," he said. "That's the movie. Right there." They filmed the scene 3 more times, getting different angles and coverage. Each take was slightly different, but that raw core remained. By the time Drake called wrap, Rebecca was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She felt like she'd run an emotional marathon. Drake pulled her aside as the crew started breaking down the set. "I'm going to have this edited tonight. Tomorrow morning, we're showing it to 4 potential investors. They're the ones with the deepest pockets and the most interest in independent film. If even 2 of them say yes, we can move forward." "And if they don't?" Rebecca asked. Drake was quiet for a moment. "Then we tried. And what you just did in there, that was worth trying for." That night, Rebecca couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the fact that tomorrow, 4 strangers would watch 5 minutes of film and decide her fate. She thought about calling her parents, but what would she say? "Hi, I quit my job and moved across the country to chase a dream that might die tomorrow." They already thought she was crazy. Instead, she pulled out her grandmother's portfolio and ran her fingers over the worn leather. "I hope I made you proud," she whispered to the empty room. The investor screening was at 10 a.m. in a small private theater. Rebecca wasn't allowed to attend. Drake said it was better if she wasn't there, that investors needed to focus on the film, not the person. So she waited in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, nursing a cup of tea she couldn't taste and watching the clock like it was her enemy. Patricia had promised to call the moment the screening ended. Rebecca's phone sat on the table in front of her, silent and accusatory. 10 o'clock came and went. Then 10:30. Then 11. At 11:17, her phone finally rang. "Hello?" Rebecca answered, her voice barely steady. "They want to meet you," Patricia said, and Rebecca couldn't tell if that was good news or bad news. All 4 of them. They want to meet you before they make their final decision. 30 minutes later, Rebecca walked into the same screening room where the investors had just watched her performance. 4 people sat in the front row, 2 men, 2 women, all wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that screamed money without trying. Drake stood to the side with Patricia. He caught Rebecca's eye and gave her a subtle nod. "You've got this." One of the women spoke first. "That was remarkable, truly. But we need to understand, are you that character? Or can you be that character? Because we're not just investing in a 5-minute scene. We're investing in an entire film, and we need to know you can sustain that level of performance." Rebecca thought about the question, about the difference between being and performing, about her grandmother and the portfolio and the 43 rejections, about the past 12 weeks of training that had transformed her body and mind, about Vincent Drake's cruelty in that first audition and his unexpected faith in her ever since. "I'm not Catherine," Rebecca said honestly. "Catherine's been through things I hope I never experience. But what you saw in that scene, the fight, the vulnerability, the refusal to give up, that's all me. I've spent 3 years learning what it means to keep going when everything tells you to quit. Catherine does the same thing, just in a different context. So can I sustain it? Yes, because it's not just acting. It's real." The 4 investors looked at each other. More of those silent conversations that people with money seem to have perfected. Rebecca held her breath. One of the men finally spoke. "Vincent, you've been telling us for months that this project needed the right lead, that without the right Catherine, the whole film would fall apart." He looked at Rebecca. "I think you found her." The woman who'd asked the question nodded. "I agree. I'm in." The other 2 investors exchanged glances, then both nodded as well. "We're all in," the 4th investor said. "Let's make this movie." Rebecca's legs nearly gave out. Patricia grabbed her arm to steady her. Drake's smile was so wide it looked like it might crack his face in half. "Welcome to the film industry," he said to Rebecca. "The real one, where impossible things happen to people who refuse to quit." 6 months later, Rebecca stood on a red carpet she'd only ever dreamed about. The premiere of Unbreakable was happening behind her, in a theater full of critics and industry professionals and people who could make or break careers. Reviews had started coming in that morning, and they were calling her performance a revelation and the discovery of the year. Drake stood beside her, fielding questions from journalists. When they asked him about casting an unknown in the lead role, he told the story of Rebecca's audition. How she'd gone off script, how she'd been honest instead of impressive, how she'd reminded him why he loved making movies in the first place. "She didn't just change her own life," Drake told one reporter. "She changed mine too. She reminded me that the best stories come from real places, real struggle, real humanity." Later that night, after the screening, after the standing ovation that lasted so long Rebecca thought it might never end, after the party where producers and agents pressed business cards into her hand like they were giving away gold, Rebecca found a quiet corner and pulled out her phone. She opened her photos and found a picture of her grandmother. The last one she'd taken just days before she passed away. Her grandmother was smiling in that photo, the way she always smiled when she looked at Rebecca, like she was seeing something wonderful that nobody else could see yet. "I did it, Grandma," Rebecca whispered. "I didn't quit, just like you told me." Her phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Peterson, her old acting teacher. Just 3 words. "I knew it." Rebecca smiled, slipped her phone back in her pocket, and returned to the party. Tomorrow there would be more interviews, more opportunities, more doors opening that had been closed just months ago. But tonight she just wanted to stand in this moment and remember the fluorescent lit hallway. Remember Drake's smirk and his challenge. Remember choosing to be honest instead of perfect. Remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to quit, even when quitting makes perfect sense. Sometimes, she thought, the only difference between someone who makes it and someone who doesn't is the willingness to stand in that cold audition room and say, "Go ahead, try to impress me," and then actually do it.